For all of us who had questions about why did the FBI keep showing up at all these various places where they seemed like they were instigating rather than solving problems, it feels to us like we are getting more of the bullshit. Alright, let's start with those bullshit text messages, okay? Because they've given us, in this weird Word document form, a conversation that supposedly happened between the shooter and his lover. Even ChatGPT couldn't do this bad, and if this is the best that AI could come up with, then I have been afraid of AI for no reason, because this is some bullshit, okay? Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise. This is Friday, and we have the Friday News Roundup video, as we always do, but I did want to do a bonus episode about all of the information going on about Charlie Kirk. For me, this is something I could talk at enormous length about, but I just kind of wanted to hit three subjects today. I wanted to talk about all the crazy conspiracy theories that are going on that don't hold water and that we should avoid. I want to talk about influencers who are continuing to use this story for more click and how divisive that can be. But then finally, I want to talk about the fact that there are a lot of questions that are going on in this investigation. And there's a lot of things that don't feel like they're adding up. But what can we do and how can we progress forward in a positive way? Not surprisingly, the Charlie Kirk assassination has been on everybody's tongue, and mostly it's because we feel as though there are details and parts of the story that we're not getting. And what's really frustrating is it makes sense when police don't give you everything they have when the suspect is at large, because they're actively trying to catch him. But we've been told that they've caught the guy who was the shooter, Tyler Robinson, and we've been told that the police have him, the FBI have him, that they have all these documents and all these things, and we've been told that pretty much case closed. But for those of us who are paying attention, and when I say those of us, I mean all of us, we just feel like we're not getting the whole story. However, what tends to happen in circumstances like this is that we start seeing conspiracy everywhere. And we start believing that everything we see is a clue to the conspiracy we had already decided was occurring. Case in point, to just name three things that I've seen that I think we need to debunk that, and we need to be honest with ourselves when we're getting crazy and going to crazy town. There are people who saw Charlie Kirk's body laid out in the casket. His wife, Erica, had posted videos of her saying her final goodbyes. It was a very touching, super sad video. And in one of the shots of that video, she is kissing his hands. And his hands don't look lifelike because he's not alive. And he's been embalmed. And there was all these people making videos acting like, oh, there's a gotcha. Look at what's going on with his hands. Well, sad little friends, I'm on one hand, happy for you, you've never had to see a dead body, but that's what a dead body looks like. And their hands don't look lifelike because they're not alive. And they're full of embalming fluid. And embalming fluid, they've drained the blood out of the body and they've reinserted fluid to fill the body. And they can add dyes to that fluid to make it look more lifelike. But it's an art, this embalming situation. But the reality is you're never going to get the body looking alive because the soul has left the body. The blood has left the body. The life has left the body. So there's all these people trying to get hot takes and get clicks. And it's like, you guys, you're dumb, okay? That's a stupid take. And you can't profit off of somebody's death to get more likes, more clicks, because you got another conspiracy for all of the people online who just love conspiracy. And I include myself in that, okay? I know it's a sickness I have. But you got to be smart about it. You can't be an idiot, okay? And that's an idiot's take. All right, that is a juvenile, stupid, grandma and grandpa are still alive kind of take, okay? You never seen a dead body and now you're making bogus and goofy claims. Another conspiracy was that this gentleman was giving hand signals behind Charlie Kirk's back to the sniper, and that he had, given signals and, look at the way he's moving his hands. And then you look over here at this chart and see, he did the same signals as these sniper movements. And part of me thinks, why would the military allow for the whole world to have a chart that shows all the signals that the snipers are giving, right? Doesn't that seem like that might be information that wouldn't just be readily available? But maybe it is. Regardless, this individual is not somebody giving clues to the sniper. This is somebody who was one of Charlie's mentors. He was on Charlie's team. He considered Charlie to be one of his own sons who rode in the car with Charlie's body as they desperately tried to get to the hospital.
5 of us in the car now. Justin's driving. Dan is up front with the GPS. Rick has got him. Rick's on my left, and Brian is there, and I'm coming over the back seat, and Charlie's laid out just right in front of me. And Charlie's so tall, we can't close the door. We drove 4 miles, I don't know, it's 4 something miles, all the way to the hospital with the door open. To this day, I don't know how Brian stayed in the car, because we're just go.
This is a person who had his phone up, who was filming the situation, not because he was part of some nefarious team, but because he was FaceTiming with his son and daughter-in-law. All right? And but there's all these people who just couldn't wait to say, oh, look, he's signaling the sniper, you know? And then we have things like the individuals who want to create drama with Israel because they already hate Israel. Now, look, I take Charlie Kirk's stance on Israel, and that is this. I can criticize a government's movements just like I would criticize my own government's movements without hating that country. I love America, but I am freely at liberty to criticize my own government if I feel like they're doing wonky, wanky things, right? Case in point, you can love Israel, support Israel, believe that Israel has a right to exist, and still say, hey, that government's making some wacky moves, okay? We got big questions about October 7th. Why did you guys take so long? You know, those were Charlie Kirk's questions. And he had every right to do it. But just because he questioned the narrative doesn't mean Israel's like, gotta take this guy out. Because we have people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson who are also asking similar things, but in a much more aggressive and demeaning way, and somehow they're still alive. So this idea that Israel's just popping off every conservative that is suddenly questioning the narrative, lest they lose their conservative base in America, we can't let the conservative Christians stop with their narrative about Israel, and if anybody questions it, we better take them down. Then why is Tucker Carlson still alive? Why is Candace Owens still alive? And may they continue to be. But what I'm saying is the idea that Charlie Kirk had very carefully and without malice said, some of the things Israel's doing lately don't add up and aren't correct and right, and we need to have a lot of questions about what they're doing in Gaza. Those kinds of questions, his barely asking the question, is suddenly the reason why he is not with us. I mean, that's wonky narrative, okay? And that's inconsistent with reality. But there are people all over the place who I feel like are profiting off of the death of Charlie to make videos and clicks, and they're just getting crazy conspiratorial. Look, I believe there's something going on that we don't know, and we'll get into that in a minute. But to sit around and make up junk claims, his hands look crazy. What about that guy with the signals? I think Israel did it. You guys are crazy, okay? And you need to stop being clowns and goons and get on with the real narrative, because I believe there is one. But it ain't this stuff, okay? Somebody who I feel like has decided to approach this in a way that is wholly inappropriate is Candace Owens. Now, I know there's tons of people who watch this channel who really like Candace Owens, and I'm not saying that I disagree with her on everything, okay? I'm not even saying that she hasn't brought up some good points, all right? She's going to say some things that are similar to the things that I'm going to say, but her friend isn't even buried yet, and she jumped on the story and saw another investigative series immediately upon his death. And I know that she says he's my good friend and he died, and my concern is that justice has to come, and that's just how I'm wired, and I'm going to go in and defend my friend even though his body is not cold yet and we haven't even had the funeral service. Okay? I'm not saying she couldn't be collecting evidence for the eventual revelation of conspiracy. But I'm just saying she is in an emotional state. She's very upset, as we all are. But she's saying things that are not helpful, that are not creating unity, and that are appallingly inaccurate with the people who are closest to him. Because let me remind you, while she says she's a Mason of Turning Point and that she was there at the beginning, that is an accurate statement up to a point. But in 2019, they had a falling out because she started saying some things that he felt were out of control and did not hold with truth. And so he distanced himself from her, and they have not been on texting everyday terms. Okay, I know she's got a lot of videos of them dancing to songs and hanging out with Kanye and all this, but honestly, that time period is very different from this time period. And I didn't see any recent videos or recent conversations or times when she had recently been invited to speak with Charlie Kirk. I could be wrong. There could be a plethora of evidence showing that right now, currently, she had a relationship. But what's interesting is his closest associates are saying otherwise.
On 2011, 2012, 2013, they were tight. They grew TPUSA like crazy. I was shocked to see her leave until being part of TPUSA, her theories got just a little bit too down the rabbit holes. It was too extreme for their taste. And Charlie, to his credit, kept a cordial friendship with her for years, but it hasn't been a communication pipeline back and forth between the two for many years. That's why I don't know why we give Candace Owens's assessment any weight at all.
You're on the board of Turning Point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Question proof that Candace Owens has nothing to do. She would be in a perfect world if they didn't have this, what I already know was a very quiet breakup where she got too rabbit hole for him. She would be the logical heir to the TPUSA throne, but she's
and
not.
Now she's,
I think Candace has created a lane for herself.
Yeah.
It's her own lane. She wants to go after Macron's husband or wife or whatever you want to call him. She wants. I agree that I think it's cheap that she is sparking this up like she knows something between something happened between Ackman and Charlie. For what reason?
Here's what I would say. To me,
so this is problematic for Candace because her reasoning for why she's validating her popping off right now and going down all these rabbit holes and stitching together all these stories and pointing the finger at Israel is because she says her dear friend, who she and he were so close, has been taken down, and now she has to behave like this. She has to get on the story. It's incumbent upon her to seek for justice and truth because her dear friend was taken down. But when we find out that she is kind of glossing over the strength of their current friendship, it just casts shadow on some of her vehemence as to why she gets to talk about it right now. It seems to me that she could say all the things she's saying. If that's her view and that's the way she chooses to see the scenario, okay, wait till we've buried him, right? And it seems to me that while I don't even take umbrage with many of the facts that she's laid out, I think that this consistent need to see Israel as this synagogue of Satan, as she would say, is clouding her judgment as to where we should really be asking questions. But she has decided that there's a certain viewpoint on which a person ought to see the world, and if you don't, then you are the fake, the fraud, the ignoramus, who can't see the forest for the trees. And she has this viewpoint, even down to the fact that she's now trying to claim him as a Catholic, since she is a converted Catholic, saying things like, I happen to know, in fact, I'll just state it as fact, that he was praying the rosary. Charlie was praying the rosary. And in one of our later conversations, I told him that he was too smart to be a Protestant.
I think Charlie was definitely on the brink of changing some of his perspectives. And I can tell you factually, Charlie was praying the rosary. Charlie was going to Mass. One of my last conversations with Charlie was me joking with him saying, just make the last step, okay? You are, I said specifically, you're too smart to be a Protestant. Just take the last step, Charlie.
You guys. Look, I go to Mass and I also go to a Protestant service, okay? I attend both because when you live in D.C. and you are a conservative Christian, I don't say that as a conservative in a political sense, but I mean like I'm not a progressive Christian, then the Catholic Church is one of the last few places where you can go to practice your religion in the way that is conservatively accurate. I've gone to Mass, but I also go to a Presbyterian church some Sundays. And the reality is this: if you believe in Jesus Christ, if you believe in the gospel, that Christ died for you and that he died for the sins you've committed, but stands in your place so that when God looks upon you, he sees his son. If you believe that you needed that you needed the salvation, that you are too broken, too desperately a wreck to ever save yourself, that there's no amount of good deeds that you could do, that Christ came from heaven, the Son of God, and stood in your place. If you accept that and believe that, then you are saved. That's the gospel. And Charlie Kirk believed the gospel, and I believe Candace Owens believes the gospel. So why is she creating and sowing division by saying Charlie was too smart to be a Protestant? It's this idea that if you don't believe the full tenets of Catholicism, you aren't a true Christian. And I don't think that's what Charlie was doing. Charlie only ever pointed people to Jesus Christ. He didn't say, come be a Catholic. He said, come be a Christian. And I think that for her to rework the narrative, I think is incorrect. He, up to 2 months before his passing, was talking about his views on Catholicism. And while he was very charitable to them and also agreed that there are things about Catholicism that could be beautifully brought into the practice of Protestantism, he did not fully believe the Catholic doctrines and dogmas. And for her to now try to be pulling him over to her side, especially as she ties it to the dislike of Israel and of her distrust for Jews, I have a problem with that. Why does it feel like she started hating the Jews when she became Catholic? Why does she associate those two things? As someone who loves the Catholics, I don't believe that that's the way the Catholics believe, but it feels like she got into this weird little world where Catholicism equals now I don't trust Israel. And now she's saying, hey, Charlie was becoming Catholic and Charlie wasn't trusting the Jews anymore. As though those things are linked together, which they are not, but she lives in a world, it feels like, where those two things have been linked together, and that somebody in her corner who happens to be a Catholic is also somebody very mistrusting of Jews. And now those two things are one. So Charlie has to become, in her mind, a Catholic, because that explains why he doesn't trust the Jews and Israel anymore. Do you see what I'm saying? We're getting into wonky territory. So what I think about Candace is this. I think she's saying a lot of things that are lining up with what we're questioning, but she's adding in a whole bunch of stuff and trying to validate that by embellishing a relationship that she had with him so that we all have to buy into what she's saying. And that is nefarious. That is dishonest. And I thought that's what she didn't believe in. I thought her big issue was that we need to make sure that we're getting straight facts, but you're feeding me facts through a filter and through a narrative that you are such a good friend, we have to believe everything you say. Finally, she says, only people who can stop me are my husband and Erica, his wife, and nobody else has a right to tell me to be quiet. Oh, okay. But should the grieving widow have to call you and say, could you stop? Because we haven't even buried him yet. Right? Why are you putting this on her? Why don't you just stop yourself for a second, wait, pause, collect your data, get your full letters, get everything in order, line up your receipts, right? And then have your investigative series once his funeral is over. Again, she is within her complete right to say what she wants to say. She knew Charlie better than I know him because she ever had a relationship with Charlie. I never did. So I'm not saying she doesn't have a viewpoint, a vantage. I'm not saying she doesn't have things she can say. I'm not saying she doesn't have points she can make. But I think we need to show respect for the family. I think we need to not be throwing out little nuggets of information about who he really was behind scenes. I think that's inappropriate right now. I think this is a time for unity where we're bringing together the Christians, the ones who all believed in Christ just like Charlie did, and not sow division in the church. That's not what we need right now. I think it's a time for collecting our evidence and quietly sitting on it so that we can make an explosive revelation once we actually have a revelation. But just talking with the voice of authority does not actually mean you know anything. And that's what I would like to say at this time. However, there are things that I have questions about. There's a lot of things I have questions about. And I do think it would not surprise me even a little bit if we were to find out that this shooter wasn't some lone gunman, but was a part of a group, even if it's not like a federally funded group or anything, but was a part of a group that was intent on political violence towards those that they felt could not be reasoned with. Because we have all kinds of a timeline revealing conversations that were happening on Discord and all these little internet chat rooms where people were in conversation with him and they were all talking about something's going to happen to Charlie Kirk. Something's going to happen to Charlie Kirk. And then lo and behold, on the very day at the very event that everyone kept saying something was going to happen, it did happen. So it seems to me that we could insinuate that this is a group of people who were egging him on who knew more than they are now saying. But the FBI is getting really difficult for me to deal with because I feel like this is an administration and a director that we were told was going to be forthcoming, was going to finally let us know what was really going on, okay? For all of us who had questions about why did the FBI keep showing up at all these various places where they seemed like they were instigating rather than solving problems, it feels to us like we are getting more of the bullshit. All right, let's start with those bullshit text messages, okay? Because they've given us, in this weird Word document form, a conversation that supposedly happened between the shooter and his lover. And in these text messages, I'm sure you've all seen them by now, we have this lengthy exchange in which the shooter is confessing he did it, saying what murder weapon he did it with, exonerating the old man who they originally thought had been the shooter. He explains why the gun is where it is. He talks about his multiple changes of clothing. He talks about a confession note that he wrote, which is mysteriously missing. You know, it was there for 5 seconds. They took a picture of it. Now they can't find it. And also exonerating his boyfriend from having anything to do with the murder by the boyfriend responding with such questions as, why? How long you've been planning this? Huh? tell me you didn't really do it. What? Yet he also says in these text messages, you'll remember you saw me engraving bullets. Okay, if I see somebody that I dearly love engraving bullets, I'm calling the police. You're not engraving bullets because you want to go out to the range. You're not engraving bullets because you just want to make them really pretty. Okay? You are doing it, and you have been talking extensively about your dislike for a certain person and that they're coming to town and that they're going to be at this certain event. And then you start writing things like, "Hey, fascist, catch this." It's just like, those text messages were bullshit because nobody, especially in this generation, I feel like, who is very aware, and especially this guy who was chronically online, lived his whole life playing video games, understood technology. Why would he, of all people, decide to tell all of his business in a text message to his boyfriend? And go thing by thing by thing. This is where I was. This is how I did it. This is the weapon. I mean, it's like, what? How convenient. But more than anything was the unbelievability of the writing in these messages. And you have people being like, well, look at those complete sentences. That's not the way my 22-year-old writes. And okay, there's precedent for that. Although I would say I use complete sentences. I'm not 22, so maybe that's the difference. But I've texted lots of people who use full sentences. So to me, that's not necessarily a thing. But let's talk about the language used, shall we? I want to know what kind of 22-year-old calls their father their old man. Who since 1955 has referred to their father as their old man, I ask you? Okay, what is that? And then talking about, I have to go to my vehicle. You would not say vehicle, you would say car. This conversation, him referring to his boyfriend as my love. I have yet to, I'm safe, my love. I won't be home as of yet. I mean, what is this language? But my love was weird. If you're not Harry or Meghan, you're not calling each other my love. And whenever they said it, people are always like, that's so weird, my love. Nobody says my love. If anything, you'd be like, I'm almost home, babe. Just normal talk. My love? Really? I don't believe those messages for a minute. I don't understand. Why are we receiving the messages also in this format? And why are we receiving, where are the timestamps? Why can't I get a screenshot of the conversation they had? Somebody sat down to a computer and wrote this up and then tried to tell you this is how it is. And there's other people being like, this sounds to me like they asked ChatGPT to write a message between this guy and his lover. And I'm like, even ChatGPT couldn't do this bad. And if this is the best that AI could come up with, then I have been afraid of AI for no reason. Because this is some bullshit. Okay? And so what I am telling you right now is that they're not being honest with us. I also don't understand why I can't get a clear photo of this person. Right? What is going on with all of the cameras that we have, with all the cameras everybody else has? Yet I am getting something that could equate to Bigfoot. All right? That's not a picture that I can use. And I need to know how his parents knew it was him when we're basing things off of this. Okay? I know my kids walk. I know my kids' demeanor. I know the way my kids act, and I could pick them out of a crowd. I don't think I could pick my kid out of this if it looks to me as though he's Bigfoot. Okay? That's not one of mine. I also have questions about this joker who showed up and who always seems to be on call when the FBI needs somebody who has information, who saw something, who knows something. How is it that this guy was there who was an eyewitness to 9/11, who was there when the planes hit the towers and he could call and he could give all the information and he had all the insight as an eyewitness? He was there for that. How is it that this guy was also around for the Boston Marathon bombing? Okay, how is it this guy is also on scene at the most significant assassination in the century? And I say that this assassination even outranks JFK. I know that's a wild statement to say, but that is a president. And while we grieve deeply for the assassination of a president, every president is basically the face of a nation. So if somebody has an issue with the nation, they're going to go after the president. We hate it, but we can expect it. We hate it, but we've been planning for it. That's why there's a Secret Service. That's why they travel around in caravans where you're not sure which car they're in. That's why there's 2 Air Force Ones. That's why, because we know this guy's under threat. To have somebody who sits at a table and has conversations with people and who is trying to lower the temperature, who has consistently said the only way we can come together as a nation is if we can sit across the table from each other and have a conversation about the things we differ in. They took that guy out. Okay, so that's why I say it's the most significant assassination of the century. maybe even the entire breadth of our American history, because this person was espousing the very virtues that we say we believe in: the freedom of speech, the freedom to have conversation, the freedom to talk to your neighbor and to differ in what you believe, but to be civil about it. And they took him out. So how is it that this guy shows up to this assassination and then he suddenly pops up out of the crowd and is like, I did it, and they arrest him. And then it comes out, well, I didn't really. I just wanted to let the shooter get away. Like, why are you always here? How do you know where to be when it's time to be there? So I find this very suspicious. But probably the thing I found the most suspicious, the most horrifying, was that the day of the assassination, I saw this post going around and I verified it myself. There is a book that was up on Amazon, published September 9th. Okay, the assassination was September 10th. On the cover of this book, we have the tent he was sitting under when he was assassinated. That was published September 9th. Available on Amazon. The shooting happens, suddenly you can no longer access that page. If you Google the book, it comes up. When you click the link, you get a wonky page that says, sorry, there's a problem on our end. The book is now available, but the publication date has been changed to September 11th. Because somebody somehow managed to publish an entire book on the assassination of Charlie Kirk the next day after it had been happening. I mean, even that is an unreliable date. But it wasn't originally that date. It was September 9th. Those are the conspiracies I don't understand. I don't understand these crazy text messages. I don't understand why that old man was there. I don't understand how a book about Charlie Kirk's assassination was available on the 9th. And I don't understand how there's all of these people who are in the Discord chats talking about how this was happening, how they knew it, how they were predicting it, how they said the date it would happen at the event it would happen. And somehow we have people out there going, I don't know. I'm not sure. It could be anything. Like those kind of things don't make sense to me and to my mind. So there's a lot of things I have questions about, just like Candace Owens has questions. But I think that there's a time and a place for it. And I think the gathering of evidence can quietly be happening while we still wait until it's time. And I would just call for people to continue praying for the Kirk family. Continue praying for our nation, that we would come together, that the person who did this would be punished, but that if there is anything that is nefarious, that's being hidden, that all things would be revealed, that the light of heaven would shine upon all the darkness that is in all these little crevices that are working overtime to hide the truth. What is the point of hiding the truth? Let's just live in the light. What would be the harm in living in the light? Oh, because you might not have as much power. I just pray that the Lord would break the bonds, this power-hungry demonic force that's reigning and ruling in our country, that would say it's more important that I have power than that you have truth and live in the light, and that we could all flourish together. This horrific demonic force that says these people can flourish, but these people must suffer so that I may continue to climb the ladder and to ascend more and more power, demonic and satanic. So we need to pray for light to be shed in the dark places. But that's what we should be focusing on right now. And focusing on not allowing this entire force of darkness to override and rule the way that we would go out in the world. You cannot predict when you're going to die. You don't know the hour in which you will be called to heaven, but you can control the truth that comes out of your mouth. You can control if you are a trustworthy person, if you're an honest person, if you're the sort of person that wants truth to flourish. You have control over that, and that's something worth dying for. And telling the truth at all costs is more important than the fact that you got to have your way for a couple more hours here on earth. Because when it's all over, and what then? You have to account for the way you behaved. All right, that's it for now. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you'll also tune in to my Friday news video, and I will see you then for that. Bye.